This is called Enlightened Humility, the only liberation from mainstream social anxiety about external validation. So people can have a tremendous concern with external validation. Many people can have that concern. And to give a quick, I don't know if this is a summary, but definitely a quick comment. When there is a real threat of social punishment or a risk of a loss of social benefits or even the loss of an increase in social benefits. So when there's an issue of how much social benefits or social punishment will be imposed, then it makes sense to be attentive to um, public opinion, um, social consequences. However, what we find in so many cases, certainly I've experienced a lot of this, is an anxiety about external validation or social validation that is rather disproportionate to the actual issues of, or maybe uncalibrated with the actual issues of potential punishment and potential reward or benefit. So we'll talk about humility, we'll talk about enlightenment in passing. We'll talk about how social anxiety develops to a very little extent. Mostly we'll just be talking about some contrast, there'll be some humor here. For the one who is focused on effectiveness, what develops naturally? Perceptiveness and effectiveness, right? They perceive what is effective, and then, they get more and more precise in their perceptions and more precise in their ability to predict what will be effective and what won't. So for the case of a really small child who's stacking blocks, they get to be alert to how balanced the blocks are, where is a good place to put that block, their motor skills for actually placing the block where they want it to go. That develops over time. So their perceptiveness, their coordination develops, their precision, their skill, all sorts of things develop over time so that they can be more effective. And they're not necessarily that concerned about social validation. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't, but um, they probably love social validation, but they also don't need social validation. They can get frustrated on their own, and somebody telling you, "Oh, you're doing great," doesn't change the fact that they're frustrated. And they can be very fascinated and engaged and having a lot of fun with the stacking of blocks, even though they might, seem to the 4-year-old or the 9-year-old to be extremely unskilled, and they're having so little success, and yet they're really enjoying themselves. So they're just focused on increasing effectiveness, increasing perceptiveness. So we may on occasion be really attentive to what are the social consequences of our ability to stack blocks. Are we focusing on the right outcomes that society or our social group wants us to focus on? Are we using the right methods that society approves? These can get to be complicated and stressful concerns. Um, if there are real social punishments that are pending, it's good to know that. If there are real social rewards that are pending, it's good to know that. Uh, we can be concerned about social consequences and interested in social consequences and effectiveness in regard to to producing particular social consequences. That doesn't reduce our overall attention to effectiveness. That's actually one form of attention to effectiveness. But we can develop um, a kind of negligence, a distraction, a state of distraction or unalertness. So for the one who is anxiously obsessed over pursuing a socially approved goals through socially approved methods, there's a potential for negligence in regard to one's own inner compass or motivations, really. What interests me? What motivates me? And if society or a social group encourages me and rewards me for particular uh, activities, then I get I get motivated by wanting those activities. So then I kind of get accustomed to getting rewarded for those activities. So I want the reward, but the method of using it might be really not very effective, but yet in a particular social setting, it's subsidized, for instance. Or there could be motivations that I have that society really discourages and punishes, so I learn not to explore them. And if I'm put in a social setting with a lot of pressure over and over that represses certain motivations, well, then I'll actually suppress my own attentiveness to those motivations. I get uncalibrated as far as my inner compass. I don't know. Um, I have a built-in conflict, an internalized conflict in regard to what motivates me or what attracts me, even what repulses me. So such a negligent obsession as far as you know social approval, it can be very popular. And when I say it's negligent, it's fine in the context where their social approval produces the desired result. Then I want to be attentive to effectively attracting social approval. However, outside of that setting, or when no one's looking, or whatever the details are, if I'm still operating under a social program, when that program is irrelevant, if it's no longer subsidized, if there's no longer a referee watching me and monitoring me to make sure that I don't cheat by using both hands. It's like, I mean, think of a silly example, but somebody who's doing a bag race, like a sack race where you get, put your whole body into a sack and jump, hop inside of that sack. Well, if you do that all day and you're in a sack race, at the end of the sack race, don't you take off the sack and then walk normally? Well, metaphorically, what if people don't do that? They're so accustomed to certain uh, social regulations and rules that outside of those regulations and rules, they're habitually using whatever patterns work well within that social circumstance. So outside of that circumstance, they're very disoriented. They're very ineffective. They're like expecting, why there's that concern of is anybody going to punish me for if I take, because I'm really having trouble with this sack. It's slowing me down a lot. Am I going to get in trouble if I just get out of the sack and start walking normally when there's no one around, right? No cameras, no restrictions. That's getting into that thing about just social anxiety, and most people have it to a great extent, and we're not encouraged to admit it. We're even discouraged to admit it. Don't show your anxiety because that's shameful, that's negative, that's discouraged, that's punished, that is not rewarded, or that will even result in loss of rewards in some cases. So there can be a anxiety about exposing stress and intimidation and fear and worry and anxiety and so on. So negligent obsessions, where there's obsession on something that's ultimately of no practical or very little practical importance, or only occasionally of practical importance, that can become obsessive, and that means neglecting other issues that would be relevant. And that can be very popular. It can be encouraged by social systems, of course. Perhaps the promotion of obsessive negligence in the masses is actually a key tactic of certain systems of social influence. In other words, that's a core goal of the system of social influence, to impose obsessions and distractions and diversions and confusion and negligence and naivety, confusion amongst the masses. So we're going to shift gears a bit here and imagine that there are three different individuals who have all witnessed the exact same sequence of words. One of them was totally repulsed by the words and completely withdraws because they just don't want to give any attention to that sequence of words at all. So they never in the future make any reference to that sequence of disgusting words, or just tiny, barely, yes, I saw it, I don't want to talk about it. They never bring it up. They're very withdrawn or shy in regard to talking about it because they really don't want to talk it up. That sequence of words really was disturbing to them, like profoundly disturbing. No, let's not talk about it, ever. Now that was the first of the three. The next one of the three was also repulsed, but was actually more attracted than repulsed. They witnessed a particular series of words. So that one invested lots of times in the fascinating sequence of words, repeating it, condemning it actually, constantly condemning the words, labeling them as shameful and repulsive and negative and infuriating. Certainly not fascinating, but in fact, they were fascinated by the words. They just didn't call them fascinating because socially that was not acceptable. That was, discouraged. So I mentioned three witnesses. They all watched the exact same series of words. The first one completely disturbed by it. The second one, you could say mixed emotions. They're talking with condemnation and shame and disgust, but they really seem quite interested and fascinated even in the particular sequence of words. The last one of the three did not claim to be certain what the sequence of words even really meant. They claim to be skeptical about the value of that sequence of words. We don't know if it's important. We don't know if it's valuable. So here's a sequence of words. I don't know if this is connected to the other thing at all, but here's a sequence of words. The crippling of the emotions of the general public is a core function of modern governing systems. That's a statement by the most famous fallen angel in the Semitic Empire. Semitic, we probably don't know the word Semitic very well. It's the core of the word anti-Semitic. So in the Semitic Empire, there still is a very famous fallen angel. And that fallen angel said, the crippling of the emotions of the general public is a core function of modern governing systems. That fallen angel, by the way, very famous in the Semitic Empire, is widely known for carrying a three-pronged weapon. Some people would say a pitchfork, trident. There's been some different names for it. And different people have labeled that weapon in different ways. So Shiva, you might know the name Shiva as a Hindu god. Shiva, entirely different from the being I was just talking about, a different celestial being than that one. Shiva is a Hindu celestial being that just happens to also use a three-pronged weapon. And Shiva read the words above that I just spoke previously. And Shiva said, that idea is simply blasphemy and heresy, and it's forbidden to make any further reference to it. Moving on. They weren't super upset. They didn't seem that upset to me. They just moved on. Neptune, who is an entirely different celestial being, but just happens to also use a three-pronged weapon. When Neptune was exposed to that sequence of words, here's what Neptune said. That idea that the core function of modern governing systems is to cripple the emotions of the general public. Neptune said, that idea is insulting, and we must do everything that we can to preserve the proper focus of our governing systems, that we have the right focus now, we need to preserve it. And that focus is to promote the emotional stability and maturity and solidity and stability and security and stability and solidity and balance of every single citizen of our plantation. Poseidon, who is an entirely different celestial being, but just happens to also use a three-pronged weapon, read the above words or heard those words and said, anyone who even entertains such an idea is clearly already mentally disabled, mentally ill, mentally screwed up, mentally disordered, and therefore they need to be forcibly medicated with some electric shock therapy, which is the latest thing. It's like everybody, the whole 20th century, psychiatric profession, just it's so awesome what they're really excited about it. I mean, there's no actual science to show that it's in any way beneficial to the recipients of the shocks, but that's not even, is that important? So anyway, as Poseidon was saying, anybody who entertains ideas about, modern governing systems intentionally crippling the masses of people emotionally, well, hey, I'm recording.
Oh, sorry.
Anybody who entertains the idea that the governing systems are crippling the masses emotionally is mentally ill, needs to be forcibly medicated with some electric shock therapy, this type of medication. It's very professional. You know, they have like everybody wears white coats, so there you go. Um, and the forcible medication, protocol, the therapeutic beneficial thing, very beneficial to greater social interests, if not the actual individual patients. Well, that needs to be done in order to demonstrate the tremendous compassion and charity of our holy system of governing the masses through military domination, psychological indoctrination, electric shock therapy, and of course the generous support we receive from the targets of our tax extortion scheme. So we have this tax extortion scheme. We redistribute wealth from the weak to us, and we just really value their support. And this operation that we have, this business, this corporation, if you want to call it that, well, it's very compassionate and charitable, and it's like it's preserving the best interests of the greater good and of humanity and of stuff like that. Just it's great. It's very heroic and patriotic. That's the basic thing. So anyway, next the angel Satan, who's an entirely different celestial being, but just happens to also use a three-pronged weapon, said, let's talk about the word Semite for a minute. This is really not related to the other stuff, by the way. There was once a fellow named Shem, and in Greek his name was Sem. And so the people that descended from him were called Semites. And all the Arabs and Hebrews and Ethiopians and Phoenicians and lots of other folks were descendants of Shem. And so we call all those people Semites. And anyone who learns to speak the Semitic languages of those Semitic social groups can also be called a Semite or a Semitic person. So Satan, again, not the same. Just it happens to have a three-pronged weapon. Just coincidence. Satan continued, so what is an anti-Semite? That is someone who does not accept the genetic superiority of the Semites as the rightful rulers over all of the rest of humanity. Obviously, anti-Semitism is ridiculous because the prophet Noah clearly stated that he had total social authority over the entire population of humanity. That was a new thing prior to Noah. Humanity was corrupt and stuff, and so then they got slaughtered and wiped out with the flood, and then Noah was like, okay, basically I'm in control because we need to keep things orderly. And if you think about a parent, and like if there's just been a catastrophe or something, that'd be kind of a normal thing. A parent would be like, okay, we need order, right? So Noah was kind of like that. He said, hey, now I, unlike anyone ever before me, I have total social authority over the entire population of humanity. So the 6 commandments that were given to Adam, well, those only applied to the particular descendants of Adam. Noah then had a 7th commandment given to him, and that commandment was to impose those governing and regulatory systems over all the rest of humanity with courts of justice, to establish courts of justice and to, you could say oppress the occupied territories. That's okay. So, but for their own good. So let's see. To promote order, law and order, stuff like that. It's like a TV show, except, it is a TV show. So Noah wasn't just ruling over his tribe. He wasn't just a king. He was the king of kings. And here's the deal with this. His new Semitic empire that had all these different, basically they ruled over all of humanity, according to them. And he was the first king of kings, so he sent supervisors throughout the empire to place magic crowns on the heads of the various regional kings throughout the different places, like Denmark, the Danish king, and Belgium, the Belgian king, England, the English king, Thailand, they'll have the Thai king or the Siamese king, right? And Siam. So the Brazilian king in Brazil, there are all these different, all these different kings throughout all these different parts of the world, and they're all, coronated or crowned by the agents of the King of Kings. So the King of Kings sends their supervisory agents out to crown kings all over the place, and that's what happened over time. So eventually, some of these local rulers, these kings or governors or queens, whatever, they created parliaments, and this is really interesting. The parliaments were created so that the taxpayers could elect one high priest, which they call their prime minister. Oh wait, sorry, no, they can't. They don't elect the high priest. but they get to elect one member of parliament that represents their local area. So basically, like throughout the whole planet right now, there's like a lot of members of parliament, and they represent a lot more people. So let's just do the math real quick. I don't know if this is exactly precise, but so I'm getting a little ahead. We got that there's the King of Kings, then the local king, and then the prime minister, the high priest. Well, that's the guy who, or could be a woman, appears on TV and pretends to oppose the royals and the ruling bankers and the King of Kings and all that stuff. They pretend to be like, well, we gotta fight against them, and they get in that. We're defending the interests of the public against the international. You see, the military leader and the political leader over there 16,000 miles away and 1,600 miles away and 16 miles away. Well, we have to, they had to have the conflict and stuff because it's very exciting. So the high priest could appear on TV and pretend to oppose the royals and the ruling bankers and so on. And the naive masses would occasionally vote in an election, like every 8 years or whatever, for one of the 69,375 members of parliament. So that was a big innovation because then there was a fair balance of power between the elected ministers of parliament and the various other parts of the ruling priesthood. So this was just like, all of the taxpayers were like, oh yeah, I'm really happy to pay my taxes now because I got to vote for, I was like one of a million people that cast vote for one of those 69,735 members of parliament. So because of that extremely fair balance of power, the masses would be more compliant in their participation in the holy imperial operations, which were, number one, paying taxes, and number two, spreading democracy through warfare, like bombing civilians. So finally, the devil, who's an entirely, just to be clear, is an entirely different celestial being, but just happens to also use a three-pronged weapon. He said, or she, let's talk about humility for a minute, maybe just one, and then that'll do it. Humility is the experience of someone who respects the potential for social punishment or of a loss of social benefits. They're interested in social consequences. They have respect for social consequences. They don't completely ignore social consequences. They aren't naive in relation to the reality of potential social consequences. They don't pretend not to be concerned if they are concerned. They're humble. They're aware or respectful of the potential for social consequences, various kinds, good, bad, whatever, mixture. Arrogance, distinct and contrasting to humility, arrogance is the state of distress in which someone hysterically pretends not to be humble because they don't want anybody to find out that they're actually scared, as in humble, as in respectful. They pretend not to be respectful, so they display kind of test disrespect. Who can they be disrespectful toward? And if they get away with it, great. They try to distract, they try to divert, create some drama. Maybe they say, oh, well, I plead, guilty to the encroachment penalty, which is a 5-yard penalty, but there was no personal foul. Yeah, maybe I grabbed the guy's face mask a little bit, but that was inadvertent. It was just a 5-yard encroachment penalty. So they plead guilty to the small offense, and actually they're just distracting from the potential for getting a more significant punishment, more severe punishment. So the arrogant are afraid of being humiliated. That's the basic thing. They're afraid of being